And welcome to Law and Crime Now, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us. We're going to get right into it. Let's start with Lori Vallow Daybell. This is the mother who is accused, alongside her current husband, Chad, of conspiring to tamper with evidence in connection with the discovery of the remains of her children, Tylee and JJ, who were found buried in Chad's backyard. Now, we have seen their release of hundreds, maybe even thousands of documents regarding Lori Vallow's custody dispute years ago with her ex-husband, Joseph Ryan, who has since died. And this really gives you an insight into this world. It reveals disturbing new details, and we're going to get all into that. But let's tell you what, we'll start right now with Lori Vallow Daybell herself. So let's go back to Arizona when her other former husband, Charles Vallow, again, he too has since died. There was a plea for him to have her psychiatrically committed. She was in a police interview. Just listen to what she had to say.
I just think it's funny because he's trying to tell everything.
Right. So.
That's very smart. Because I'm really the one that did something wrong.
But here's the thing: is I don't know, and I'm not going to take sides.
Right. No,
but just talking to you, I mean, I don't see you being a danger to yourself or anybody else. You got your kids to school.
Right.
I don't know, but I'm not going to play side. I'm just going to let you know that we are required, if you're here, that we will, even with force if we have to,
right.
If you're still here when it's approved, we'll have to take you to CBI.
Okay. And what is it called? I was just going to write it down.
Community Bridges.
Okay.
That's where we take you. Now, I don't know who he went through to get the order taken care of.
That's what I'm saying. How do you even get that? He got that in the middle of the night? How do you get something in the middle of the night?
It's family members can do it for other ones who have like drug dependency or not getting help, mental health
issues. Yeah, but how would
issues.
he had to come here? Isn't stuff closed?
It's not here. There are places you can go. So
how would you think of something?
I don't know. I don't know.
Sorry.
So
it's called Community Bridges. Is that what you call it? I'm just going to write it down.
So I'm going
but they'll
to.
be looking for me. That's the whole thing. Like, that's what.
We don't bust down doors to get you, but we will knock. So if you see police officers knocking, talk to them through the door if you really don't want to go.
Okay.
If you want a free medical evaluation, psychological
I was gonna say, I
evaluation.
haven't gotten any sleep in about 3 days. They have good facilities.
They do actually, from what I understand.
And a gym where I could work out.
Yeah,
I'm
so
kind of happy.
like I said,
You'll be okay without your mama.
You are going to get a padded room.
All laughs, Tylee sitting next to her, she's not a danger, how things change. Okay, let's get right into it. I'm here with Law and Crime's very own Terri Austin. I'm also joined by forensics expert and former San Diego PD lab director Jennifer Shen, and of course, executive trial producer Cathy Russon. Great to have everybody here. Cathy, I want to start with you. You know I was going to start with you because you have been following this case from the very beginning. You have been combing through all of these new documents. So tell us, what exactly have you learned about Lori and Tylee's life before Chad Daybell even got into the picture?
Let me just tell you, what I am is saddened. Tylee had a crazy, hectic, traumatic life, probably her entire life. And this starts with this custody dispute between her father, Joseph Ryan, and Lori Vallow when they got divorced. Now, the divorce went through, but they went through years after that of a custody battle where Lori tried to keep Tylee from him. And this started when she was like 3 years old. And we, a site called, oh my gosh, I just forgot the name. Anyway, you'll see the watermark come up when we show you the court documents. They obtained almost 1,800 pages of this child custody dispute. 1,800 pages, and that's not everything in the dispute because it got switched to another county after that. I've never seen anything like it. 36 pages of docket hearings on the docket. They went through years of battle, and what it was a push and pull with Tylee in the middle. And at one point, a social worker recommended that Tylee be removed from Lori. Now let's fast forward to what we know today. And what we know today is Tylee's dead, and her mother is likely responsible for it. And had things worked out the way they were supposed to or should have in the court system, Lori may have never even raised Tylee. There was horrible accusations, and we can get into that, Jesse, labeled at Joseph Ryan, Tylee's father, and he had to
let's
go
talk
through
about
a
that.
lot.
There were sexual abuse allegations, and I'm curious, after reading these documents, explain to us what these allegations were and really what was behind them. Was it Lori fueling rumors, or was there evidence to support this?
Okay, so Colby Ryan, who we all know because he's come out, he's the older brother of Tylee, and he's been in the news ever since she's gone missing. Even though his last name is Ryan, he was not Joseph Ryan's biological son. Lori changed his name to Ryan when they got married, but he never adopted him. So he's not involved in the child custody dispute, even though he was like 11 and 12 or something when this was going on. He does say that Joseph Ryan molested him. Okay, but what we learn from reading through these documents is it's a very good likelihood, and I don't want to he says today that Joseph Ryan molested him, so I want to believe that because he's a victim and we should believe it. But what we see in the documents is Tylee is a little girl, and she is told to say things to the social workers, who then, after many evaluations,
You mean told by Lori to speak bad about Joseph?
No. Yeah, so what we learn is the social workers come back with a recommendation saying the child has been coached in their opinion. And what little Tylee says is, my daddy Joseph Ryan crashed into me 2 different times. That's how she worded it, with his body. And they said, when? And she said, when I was 4 years old. And she's 5 at that time. So then they said, well, Tylee, you never saw your dad in your 4-year-old year because Lori had kept her from him. And then she comes back and she says, this little girl, 5-year-old, says, oh, I meant 4 years ago when I was 1. And then her mother walks in the room at that point, and she turns to Lori and says, I told them, Mom. So
I mean, this is just a sample of this, and I want to get more into it, but you spoke about Tylee. Just to give everybody an insight, let's go back to Arizona. You'll hear Tylee right now, and again, her face is blurred, so you don't really see her, but her words, you can hear nonetheless. Take a look.
And in the scenario that she has to go with, like, my little brother, would he be, like, ordered to pick him up from school and take him? Like, there's no court order, but, like, I know,
Are you saying is Charles supposed to pick him up? Or are you saying can you guys pick him up?
Yeah, that's basically what I'm saying.
Like, who's gonna pick him up?
Could I pick him up and take him back to, like, the hotel?
Oh yeah, I don't think that even matters. Yeah, I don't think.
Okay, so Jennifer, I want to come to you as we watch this young girl, I should say, who literally, her remains were discovered. But at this point, there is no cause of death of either JJ or Tylee. No one has been charged with killing these 2 children. What does that tell you about investigators and the forensic team at this point? Are they at a loss for what happened?
No, what that tells me is that they are doing a really good job, because you want to make sure by the time you charge someone with murder and you put that charge and that person in front of a jury, that they have all their I's dotted, T's crossed. And so what they're doing is meticulously going through the evidence and trying to connect the Chad and Lori to the bodies, to the gravesite, to the actual crime of the murder and the burying and destroying of the bodies. And without that, it's difficult to make a murder charge stick. So that's what they're doing now. They're really going through and looking at all the evidence and trying to determine exactly how they can convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that these 2 people were responsible for the murder of these children.
We got preliminary hearings for both Chad and Lori set for August. The question is, will we see murder charges before then? I'll get more into that. But Kathy, let me just go back to you for a second. Let's get more into these documents. There are some supernatural elements that are discussed here, right? And also, if you can, on top of the supernatural elements, Charles Vallow, Alex Cox, and we know that Alex Cox has been alleged to have a direct role in what happened with these kids. Both of these men are discussed in these documents as well. Can you elaborate on both these issues?
of all, I do want to give credit where credit was due. The site is called Wicked Truths and F-Bombs, and they put out all the money, expense, and time to gather all of these documents that we're talking about today. Okay, in these documents, we learn, and we did know this before, we heard some reporting about this before, but Alex Cox, the brother, gets involved in this custody dispute, and he ends up tasing Joseph Ryan. He ends up getting charged with assault. He spent 90 days in jail. He pled guilty and got probation. So now Joseph Ryan's been tased by Alex Cox. Charles Vallow got very aggressive. He was at they had to meet at a central location to exchange Tylee. He hired people to follow Joseph Ryan in his truck after he had Tylee. Charles Vallow also assaulted Lori's attorney's wife in the parking lot of the courthouse after a custody hearing. Assaulted her. And it just gets stranger and stranger. Charles Vallow, but in all fairness, he's going by everything his wife is telling him about Joseph Ryan. And so that's probably why he's getting so angry about it. And then this one other part of this that we learn in this psychosexual evaluation that Joseph Ryan willingly took, wanted to take it. We learned that he was little to no danger of being a sex offender. But in that, we learned that Lori's dead sister, Stacy, she died in 1998 when she's 31 years old. We don't know her cause of death. Lori believed that Tylee, who was born in 2002, was her dead sister reincarnated. And she would talk to her dead sister.
So, normally I would say this is outrageous, but given everything we've heard in this case, nothing shocks me. Terri, how is this going to tie into the current case when you think about, one of the reports says that Lori had these fantastical or fanatical religious dogma beliefs, as you just heard, thought Tylee was her dead sister. There was another allegation report that Lori would rather have seen Tylee dead than hand the kids over to Joseph. And so when you think about this, we have under a minute, how is this all going to tie into the current situation?
Here's what I hope occurs with the current situation. I hope that all of this evidence about the children, about the fact how they were buried and how they were hidden and how they conspired to do all this, I certainly hope that it leads to murder charges for Lori and Chad Daybell, because frankly, the fact that these two children had to go through these horrible lives, they clearly went through some real battles as far as both the divorces were concerned. And so it shows to me that Lori only cares about herself. And that is what I'm hoping happens. I agree that the authorities have to take their time, but I hope it ends in murder charges.
And you speak about that. We're also talking about Joseph Ryan. Remember, his death was classified as a heart attack, but that case was reopened and now being investigated by the FBI. A story that we will continue to follow here on Law and Crime. But when we come back, another big story in the news. You might have heard about it. Ghislaine Maxwell. A lot of developments. We'll be right back right after this. And welcome back. We're continuing to analyze the case of Ghislaine Maxwell, who's currently in federal lockup on child sex trafficking and perjury charges. As you might recall, the main allegations here are that she procured and groomed minors to be abused by financier Jeffrey Epstein in the 1990s. Now, we have a few updates for you that we want to talk about. First, she has an attorney. Two, a bail hearing has been set for July 14th. And a big question, does she have sex tapes of Jeffrey Epstein? That's a big one. We're going to get into that. But before we do any of that, let's go to the press conference when she was arrested. And you're going to hear again from the SDNY, this is actually the U.S. attorney from the SDNY, talking about more of her alleged crimes.
That abuse included sexualized massages during which the minor victim was fully or partially nude. These sexualized massages developed into sexual encounters for which Maxwell, in some instances, was present and participated. Maxwell and Epstein worked together to entice these minor victims to travel to Epstein's residences, depicted on the other chart at the front of the room. his residence in New York City on the Upper East Side, as well as Palm Beach, Florida, and Santa Fe, New Mexico. Some of the acts of abuse also took place in Maxwell's residence in London, England. In addition to allegedly enabling and participating in the sexual abuse of young victims, Maxwell compounded her crimes by repeatedly lying in 2016 when she was questioned under oath. And we have charged those lies in 2 perjury counts. Maxwell lied because the truth, as alleged, was almost unspeakable. Maxwell enticed minor girls, got them to trust her, then delivered them into the trap that she and Epstein had set for them. She pretended to be a woman they could trust. All the while, she was setting them up to be sexually abused by Epstein, and in some cases, by Maxwell herself.
All right, let's get right into it. Terri, we know that Ghislaine Maxwell has retained Christian Everdell, who was assistant U.S. attorney from the Southern District of New York. Now, the SDNY is currently prosecuting Maxwell. He was also instrumental in prosecuting El Chapo. This is a big get for her, but what does that tell you about where she plans to take this case? Because this, I imagine, if you're going to have representation, this is exactly who you want.
Well, that's right, Jesse. I think anytime you get a high-powered attorney who has been handling some very serious cases like El Chapo, he knows what is going on in the prosecutorial office. He has contacts, and I think what we're going to see is that she is going to flip on all of Epstein's friends to make the case easier for herself.
Ah, you led me right into it. So I'm going to ask you the million-dollar question. I'm not going to let the audience wait anymore. Prince Andrew, let's start with him. Big question is he sweating? So A, the question is, can he be extradited to the U.S. If he's ultimately charged? How would that work? And is he concerned? Will he actually take the initiative and decide to be interviewed by authorities in the U.S. yet again in light of this development? So what's going to happen with Prince Andrew?
Well, you know, there is an extradition treaty between the United States and England, so he could be extradited here. The question is, what would happen after that? And so I think he could possibly face charges, but I think we're going to see that he will cooperate because he clearly doesn't want to be in any way, shape, or form convicted of any crimes, and he doesn't want to serve any prison time. So I think you'll see some cooperation on his part as well if he's actually named.
We talked about Alan Dershowitz on our last show. I'll give you some other names. Bill Clinton, President Donald Trump. Are we having a situation where both of them might come under the wire? But then again, are they in the same situation as Prince Andrew?
I don't think so, Jesse, because frankly, their contacts with Epstein were not as significant and were not as numerous. And so, yes, there are a lot of pictures with Clinton and other associates, frankly, but I don't think they're going to come under any sort of scrutiny as far as criminal liability is concerned. So we'll see what happens, but I think they'll be able to keep their distance at this point.
Remember, Maxwell was picked up in New Hampshire at this lavish estate, and it was a multi-agency task force that ultimately apprehended her. And I want to go to William Sweeney, who's the assistant director of the FBI, who spoke during this press conference. Take a listen.
Almost 1 year ago, when our offices stood before you and announced the arrest of Jeffrey Epstein, I stated that preserving the innocence of children is among the most important responsibilities we carry as adults. Too often, adults in our society have turned a blind eye to the type of criminal behavior that we announced back then and announce again today. The villains in these outrageous crimes are the adult perpetrators, not the youth, who are our neighbors, our students, vulnerable foster children, and teens seeking support. Today, we announced the arrest of one of the villains in this investigation. Early this morning, Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested in Bradford, New Hampshire, by FBI special agents and NYPD detectives from the FBI NYPD Crimes Against Children Task Force. Our team from New York was assisted by special agents assigned to our Boston, Newark, New Haven, and Albany field offices. We've been discreetly keeping tabs on Maxwell's whereabouts as we worked this investigation, and more recently we learned she had slithered away to a gorgeous property in New Hampshire, continuing to live a life of privilege while her victims live with the trauma inflicted upon them years ago. We moved when we were ready, and Ms. Maxwell was arrested without incident. Like Epstein, Ms. Maxwell chose to blatantly disregard the law and her responsibility as an adult, using whatever means she had at her disposal to lure vulnerable youth into behavior they should never have been exposed and which creates lasting harm. We allege that from at least 1994 through at least 1997, Ms. Maxwell assisted Jeffrey Epstein's abuse of minor girls by helping to recruit, entice, groom, and abuse children under the age of 18.
Jennifer, over to you. What are the forensics in this case? What should we be thinking about the evidence collection here? Because, yes, we're dealing with something in the 90s, and I imagine that proves difficult. But it's our understanding, based on court documents, it's not witness testimony alone. There is corroborating evidence. You're dealing with multiple properties here where these crimes allegedly took place. What should we be thinking about?
Well, you're right. It's difficult. These crimes took place a long time ago, but there are certainly, when you eyewitnesses, people involved, that would be the easiest thing. But sometimes there are records kept of these things. There are records of flights. There are records of these children being transported to these areas where the crimes occurred. So you have those sorts of things to look for. And you also have, again, it's tough, but you may be able to find some corroborating evidence of those victims in these areas where they were sexually assaulted, and whether that's DNA, fingerprints, some sort of body fluid, hair fibers, that sort of thing. It just really depends on what kind of evidence you can get your hands on that was present at that time. We can find trace evidence and DNA evidence on items of clothing, pieces of evidence that are decades old. So it's just a matter of getting a hold of some of those things. And if they can, and they could, for instance, find body fluid on sheets, dresses, clothing, any kind of evidence from that time, that would be really, really helpful in this situation.
Absolutely. But Terry, how about sex tapes? So there's this allegation, I mean, not even an allegation, report, that a friend of Maxwell says that she has in her possession these sex tapes that Epstein has, that apparently he was recording people as an insurance policy. You think this is real? I mean, how much more twisted can we get? If she does have them, where would they be? How is this going to play out? Wouldn't investigators have found this already? Your thoughts on this, Terry?
Well, listen, I hope we do have sex tapes, because it will be a lot easier to convict if you actually have that sort of evidence. And it wouldn't be the first time we see this sort of thing happening when there's abuse of especially young children. You saw with R. Kelly the fact that he recorded all of these incidents. It could very well be that Epstein did as well. And if the tapes
Terry,
exist,
wouldn't it be
I
a
hope we
bargaining
find
chip? Wouldn't it be a bargaining chip for her if she's like, I have these tapes, you'll never believe who's on them. But I'm not going to tell them to you until you offer me a deal.
Listen, they are negotiating as we speak if these tapes do exist. And yes, she will use that as a bargaining chip. But I think that the prosecution is going to say, look, in order for us to give you any sort of allowance, any sort of, leeway here, you better let us know where these tapes are and, give them to us.
Talk about leeway. We know that she has an upcoming bail hearing. The question is, will she be granted any kind of bond? Will she be allowed to spend her time outside of jail pending a trial? This is somebody who seems like the prime definition of a flight risk and has a ton of resources. She has been hiding out in a lavish New Hampshire property. But, it's something that we're going to be watching and to see what will happen. You have to imagine the prosecution has stronger arguments than the defense, but we will see. When we come back, we have to talk about Elijiah McClain. There are startling new developments. Stay tuned. Welcome back. On to Elijiah McClain out of Colorado. This is the 23-year-old young man who died after suffering from a heart attack, and he died in the hospital a few days later. This was after a controversial police encounter, a violent encounter that was caught on tape. And now we're learning some new developments. First, we learned that an independent investigatory panel is going to be set up. But maybe even more alarming here in this case is that several anesthesiologists have come forward to question the amount of ketamine, which is a highly powerful sedative, that was given to this man after what officers described he went into excited delirium. He was given 500 milligrams. We're going to start with the police body cam footage of when he was given this dose, and then we're going to break it down on the other side. Take a look.
Drive your knuckles right there. You don't have to put pressure until he moves. All right?
So you got 500 ketamine? Yep. Awesome, thank you. Station 520. Okay.
All right. Just drive it right behind his ear if he fights, all right?
We'll give that a minute or two, see if that works, and once it is, we'll go ahead, if you guys are okay with it, we'll uncuff him, we'll go up with the right arm, down with the left, and we'll just restrain everything. We'll give that a minute or two.
All right. Hey, Woodyard, Rosie, here in a minute, once this medicine kicks in, we're going to uncuff him, put him on the bed, and then we're going to restrain him, soft point him to the bed.
No, you're okay. I got it.
You guys have any extra gloves on you?
My back pouch right here, dude.
Okay.
They're extra large, just so everybody can fit them. But
just to fill you in, it was contacted while walking down the street wearing like a wrestling mask or something like that. It's like all these guys to get him down, and he's an injury to his push-up. No pain compliance, they were completely it's limited, he's still fighting when we got here. He's super diabetic, he's tachycardic. So I was excited to learn, and that's why we hit him with 5 of ketamine. We have no idea as far as medical history, that's allergy. So we're going to give him maybe another minute, but it looks like it's starting to kick in.
Yeah, he's snoring.
That's ready. We'll go ahead and uncuff and take him up to you. Is he in custody or?
Yeah.
I'm sure he will be.
I'm sure he will be, man.
Okay,
yeah.
that's fine. Just like
Now, it would be after this injection when he would ultimately stop breathing and go into cardiac arrest. I want to bring back my guests right now. I have with me Terry, I have Jennifer, and also have with me criminal defense attorney Katherine Smith. Jennifer, I want to start with you. So the anesthesiologists, several have come forward and said 500 milligrams may have been too much here. Now, I'm curious about your thoughts on that. What should we be thinking about?
Well, I have a couple thoughts on that. One is that, ketamine is a very, very strong drug, and it needs to be given carefully and with a lot of thought. So that does seem like a lot to me. I'm not an expert in the amount of drugs, ketamine, that someone should give someone for this particular incident. However, when you are going to be introducing a drug like that into a person, the medical attention to that person needs to be very vigilant, because people can react very poorly to a variety of different types of drugs. So if you were going to give someone that kind of dose, you would need to be regulating all of the vital symptoms, all of the vital signs very, very carefully. So what I can tell you is that police want to arrest people in a manner that is very safe for the person they're arresting and for the police officers. So I'm happy to see that there's going to be some sort of panel put together to look at this as a process going forward. And maybe it needs to be adjusted so that this could never happen again, because clearly in this case, it did not go well and resulted in a death. And that is a tragedy for everyone involved, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, Katie, and we're going to get into that panel in a second, but Katie, the autopsy report said that the blood ketamine concentration was at a therapeutic level, but an idiosyncratic drug reaction, which is, an unexpected reaction, cannot be ruled out. Now, I'm curious what you think about this, because if it turns out that perhaps the first responder who administered this dose is to blame for what happened to Elijiah McClain, and it should be noted no one has been criminally charged, does that take the pressure off the officers? Does that mean the officers would not be charged here? And does that mean the first responder could be liable for what happened?
Tough question, but I really do think that it does
That's
not
why
alleviate.
I asked it.
And to me, right? No, I mean, I think the real tricky point with this is that the reason that the first responders choose to use the level of force, in this case, administration of ketamine, the reason they choose to use it is because what they were informed from the police officers. In cases that I deal like this, a lot of times the first responders are not the ones who firsthand observe what the actual victim is doing. They're getting it from the police. And as a second point, the reason he possibly was agitated, if at all, was because of what the officers were doing that was unlawful. So no matter where you trace this back, it comes back to the unlawful acts of the officers. So they cannot escape liability here.
Terri, we know that a panel is being set up or planned to be set up by city officials, an independent panel. And it's not to evaluate or administer criminal charges. It's more to say there needs to be changes in police tactics, tactics in the fire and rescue department. I know that they tried to set up, panel was tried to set up before, but there was a former police officer on it, so that panel was thrown out, figuring I guess there was a bias here. What do you make of this new action by the city officials?
Here's what I make, Jesse. Blah, 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 blah. In my humble opinion, I truly believe that they are moving so slowly and it's taking forever just to set up the panel. This occurred in August 2019. I'm glad we have a panel. That's great. We need to determine how going forward this won't happen again. But it shouldn't take this long. And the statement that they made in terms of developing this panel was, well, first we're going to have to figure out who's going to be on the panel. Then the city council is going to have to approve that. Then after that, we're going to review the materials that have already been reviewed. Not enough, not enough. And I'm very disappointed that we don't have criminal charges as far as the police officers are concerned. So in my opinion, it's way too slow and not enough is happening and they need to move faster.
We know the governor has appointed the state AG to investigate this. This is a case that we have been following and we will continue to follow in terms of next steps. Now I'm going to take a kind of a curveball here because Katie, I'm happy you're on the panel and I want to change it up. I want to go back actually to Ghislaine Maxwell. I have a few more questions here and I'm glad to have you on. So if we can, let's go to Dermot Shea. He's the NYPD commissioner. I talked about it before the break that when Ghislaine Maxwell was apprehended in New Hampshire, this was a multi-agency task force. So let's just listen to what he had to say. I have a couple more questions about this case.
Good afternoon, everyone. Audrey, Bill, thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. And I'll echo really their words. In my view, we are here for one reason today and one reason only. For the victims, for the survivors of these heinous crimes. And I will remind everyone that although we are talking about periods of time 20 or close to 30 years in the past, for the victims, the survivors of these sexual assaults, these crimes are as fresh today and the impact that they caused on their psyche as they were then. I want to take a special moment to thank Chief Rodney Harrison and the men and women of the New York City Police Department that worked on this case hand in hand with Bill Sweeney's special agents. Thank you.
So, Katie, I want to ask you about what we're expecting in this July 14th bail hearing. I'm of the perspective there's absolutely no way that Ghislaine Maxwell, who's found at this lavish property, is just going to meet with a high bond, pay it out, be on, be out there, free, waiting for jail, waiting for a trial. I just don't see that happening. Maybe I'm speaking prematurely, though. What are your thoughts on what's going to happen in that July 14th hearing?
I completely agree. If she is let out on bail or somehow is able to get out, who ultimately is not remanded, right? We're never going to see her again. This is someone who has enormous resources and international connections and wealth. Those are all of the factors that they look at in determining whether or not someone is a flight risk. This person is 100% a flight risk. If ever there was a case for remand without bail, it's this.
Katie, I keep getting asked a ton about this, the million-dollar question. Why was she in New Hampshire? I mean, this is a person who has all these resources. Why wasn't she in Japan? Why wasn't she somewhere else? Now, I always thought New Hampshire, it's like the last place you'd expect. This is a remote area where she was. No one would ever think to look for her there, but yet she's still in the United States. What do you think went on there?
Maybe you just hit the nail on the head, Jesse. That's the last place people would look, right? She obviously thought she had this great hideout. She, wasn't having contacts with a lot of people. It certainly seems odd. I mean, personally, if I was wanted in the country, I would not be in that country. But who knows what her international connections are now? Who knows if she would have stuck out more like a sore thumb if she was in, the UK or certainly in other states or, on an island somewhere. I don't know. I bet she thought she could hide in plain sight and just duck down, hunker down. And finally, someone got her.
Well, at this point, all eyes are on her, and I'm sure there's an extreme level of protection to make sure nothing happens to her while she is in custody. Now, when we come back, we're going to talk about Vanessa Guillen and Ahmaud Arbery. A lot to break down. And welcome back, everybody. On to Vanessa Guillen. The Army has confirmed that her remains were discovered about 20 miles from Fort Hood, where she was last seen in April. Now, her suspected killer, Specialist Aaron Robinson, had committed suicide when he was confronted by police. His accomplice, his apparent girlfriend, Cecily Aguilar, has been hit with a conspiracy to tamper with evidence charge. And now there is a big push for a legislative change, given that apparently Guillen had complained of sexual harassment and that the investigation into her disappearance was delayed for really no good reason. I want to start right now with an interview from Vanessa Guillen's sister that she did with KHOU 11. It's a local media outlet, and she said that she actually met her sister's alleged killer, and she described what this case is all about. Take a look.
He was one of the people that were waiting for me, along with the first sergeant, the staff sergeant, and 3 other males. As I approached them, I just remember, his face.
She still wants to know why the soldier allegedly brutally attacked her sister.
Honestly, I still don't understand. I do have a strong feeling that the sexual harassment had a lot to do with it.
All right, Terry, what is the reason here? What is the motive? Because sexual harassment is coming up a lot in this case. There's big, if you go on social media, that is really big here. The I am Vanessa Guillen hashtag. And it's interesting when you watch this, what role that played in the case, because why would she have been killed? Your thoughts on what happened here?
Jesse, I think that there was definitely a difficult relationship between Robinson and our victim here. I think that there was some sexual harassment. She didn't actually report it, but in fact, clearly we're finding out now that that was the case, and that could have very well been the motive behind her murder.
Jennifer, I was hoping you could walk us through how these remains were confirmed to be her. And also, when we're talking about what happened to her, dismemberment, an attempt to burn the body, walk us through what's going on here.
Well, after there's been a killing like this, you'll have your suspect, your perpetrator will panic, and then you're trying to get rid of the body, and getting rid of a body is not that easy to do. So that's where you would see burning, dismembering, trying to get rid of the parts of the body that would help identify her. And that would be fingerprints, any sort of physical characteristics, dental records. All of those things would more immediately help identify a service officer in particular. But we also have DNA, so it doesn't really matter how much damage was done to the body. We can still extract DNA, and then using the DNA taken from the body can compare it to things that this victim would have owned to identify her. So in this case, when they recovered the body, there's a couple things they need to do. Obviously, you're going to be looking for all of the body, all of the parts of the body, and all of the clothing or grave site tools or evidence that is at all related to the destruction of this evidence. So when they find all those things, then they can help use that evidence to tie the victim back to the person who killed her and who buried her.
Yeah, it also has to corroborate the story of Aguilar, who is apparently the key witness to this and allegedly told authorities her involvement and what Robinson told her he did. So the question is, does her story match up with that evidence? We will wait and see, although she had her first court appearance this week on that charge. I want to switch gears right now and go to our final story of the program. We're going to go down to Georgia for the Ahmaud Arbery killing. The 3 suspects who are accused of killing this man are set to appear in court next week, July 17th, and the defense is going to basically argue a few things, and one of the big points is that the DA should not have been appointed. Now, speaking of the DA, Joyette Holmes, she sat down with CBS and she gave this interview. Here's a portion of it.
Can you walk us through what happened that day as you've seen it?
I think that evidence will speak for itself when we get in court. I've been very intentional and purposeful in making sure that this case, from our perspective, gets tried in the courtroom. Public opinion is important, but it's not what leads the day.
Have you seen the video?
I have seen the video.
All right, Katie, I'll start with you. So the big argument that we're going to hear during this hearing is that it was improper to appoint the DA. They're objecting to that. Your thoughts on this?
I can understand that argument. I mean, listen, you don't want to get anyone that is too close to this and who obviously has some connection of preconceived notions. So there's always a problem when you do that. And we see that happen again and again. That's why there's often independent people who are assigned so that you can distance yourself from any of those types of impropriety. So I can see that that would be a problem here.
You know, Terry, another big point is that the defense made a motion for some sort of relief from comments that are being made by apparently people who are speaking on behalf of Ahmaud Arbery, these inflammatory comments. What's going on?
Well, you know, I think anytime you have people who are speaking in the press and they are speaking on behalf of the family, you need to be careful. You don't want to taint the jury. And I think both sides should be very careful about any statements that they make in the public. So, you know, I think it was a good motion. And I think that probably, especially if they're not authorized to speak on behalf of the family, they should probably stay quiet for now.
You know, Katie, we're talking about some good arguments, I guess, by the defense, because it should also be noted that these 3 men, who are all charged here with, I mean, murder, aggravated assault, false imprisonment counts, bond is going to be a big issue. What can we expect in one of the most high-profile cases today to happen with respect to bond? What's going to happen, Katie?
See, that's what's really tough, because remember when we talked about Maxwell and those factors that were present there, resources, flight, connections to international communities, I don't know that those are going to be present here. And usually the whole reason we have bail and bond is such that we want to ensure that the criminal defendant shows up. It's not to be punitive, meaning it's not to punish them, it's not to force them in jail for any reason, other than we just want to make sure they show up. So it really depends what these individual defendants' connections are to other communities or lack of connections to keep them here. I anticipate we probably will see a really high bond.
Probably, based upon this case and based upon what they're charged with. Jennifer, are investigators still collecting evidence? Are they still trying to find out more what happened? I know there was an earlier part when they searched the McMichaels' home. It was shortly after that led to Brian's arrest. I imagine that was a connection there. Walk us through behind the scenes. Are investigators still putting forward a case?
Yes. So even though you have method and motive, perhaps you need to put together all the steps that will walk a jury right up to that conviction. And a lot of times that's physical evidence. So from reconstructing the crime scene, like where did the shots come from? You know, where are the cartridge cases and what were the trajectories of the bullets? And how does all of that show you exactly what happened in that shooting from a physical evidence perspective? And then getting information that would tie each of these people to that scene, whether that's, again, video, eyewitnesses.
Including Brian, who's now played apparently a direct role in what ultimately happened happened to Ahmaud Arbery. Look, anytime we have a hearing, we're obviously going to learn more, and here on Law&Crime, we plan to actually cover that. I want to thank all my guests tonight. We are going to be back later on in the week. Until then, please stay safe. We'll see you then.